Okay, is there anyone that would like to share an idea about what's alike and what's different?
And feel free to come off mic or type it in the chat.
All right, Jenny says alike, they all help students or helps all students learn. Thank you, Jenny.
And Dina, we're going to share the link, but after you do your first card sort, because we don't want you to have the answers.
Oh, okay. Differentiating in the classroom attests to meeting the goals of the entire class, where specially designed instruction is meeting a student that needs that has individual needs to learn the material. So the differentiation piece kind of speaks to the entire class. When we know students are not getting what they need, we kind of generally change some processes maybe. But with design, especially designed instruction, it is already tailored to the student and the student's ability to, based on whatever their individualized abilities may be. So if they have short-term memory issues, then their goal will be set and the instruction would be set to meet those deficits in the student.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive.
And Ms. Trotman said that all the hands are raised as in alike. So I added that to our slide here. Ms. Abernathy, she says differentiation is having many activities to meet the common goal. What do you mean by the common goal on that?
Well, I guess in differentiation, I'm just thinking that not every child starts, and I was reading some of the comments, not every child starts at the exact same place. So scaffolding these activities, having many different types of activities, whether it be a hands-on, whether it be hold on, lost my train of thought. Just many different activities to meet the common goal is whatever your objective is. Some students may start out with a lower level, some may start with a higher level, but it's all aligned with the same standard, but just at different levels where they can reach.
Good, thank you. And thank you for also pointing out that you were reading other comments in the chat. As I'm going through reading them, I'm putting a thumbs up or some type of emoji notification. We'd ask you to do the same thing in a classroom. We'd want you to either use our hand signals to say, yeah, I thought the same way. But if you see someone else's comment in there throughout any of this presentation, please, give some, some feedback to the person. Ms. Badea said that it's a service or support and not an LRE. Can you give us a little more explanations about what you mean, since we're throwing out acronyms? LRE?
Less restricted environment.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Ms. Mullins said, what is different is a differentiation and scaffolding of skills for all students. And SDI is unique, so that's similar to what Dina had mentioned there too in the initial, so I'm glad we're thinking the same thing there. And Alex also said both can occur as an alike in the classroom during instruction. That's interesting. We might talk about that a little bit more today. So yeah, great feedback, great conversation there. We find, again, a lot of teachers, they see many similarities and many differences and often can't articulate what the real difference is between the two. So we are going to have more of that conversation today. So thank you very much for all of your participation there.
All right, so I'm actually really excited to see that there was a difference, that you guys were able to articulate multiple differences in those, because that's something we often run into is people use those two words synonymously. So really, what is specially designed instruction? So as you all have said, it is instruction that meets the unique needs of a student. Now, what you see on the screen is kind of the VDOE definition of specially designed instruction, but really specially designed instruction is that bridge for a student with a disability. It is a federal requirement that must be met for them by going through the process for eligibility for exceptional education. A team says they require specially designed instruction. So it's really taking and adapting either through content, methodology, or delivery instruction that meets those students' needs based off of how they were found eligible for exceptional education. And as we go through this presentation today, we'll kind of explain a little bit further what we mean by that point. All right, so the next one, Skip, can we move? Yeah. Okay, so some features of specially designed instruction. Specially designed instruction does have to be delivered by a certified teacher. Now, it can be a general education teacher or an exceptional education teacher, but it does have to be a certified teacher. So our instructional assistants, who many of them are fabulous in helping us support our students, they can do just that, support our students, review information, but they can't be responsible for delivering specially designed instruction. So just want to make sure everyone's clear on that piece. It really is planned, organized, and purposeful for the needs of the student. There are many different domains, which will be discussed later, of specially designed instruction. It's not always academic. We have students that are identified with math-related disabilities. We have students identified with reading-related disabilities. And we have students that are identified with more social, emotional, or behavior-related disabilities. So the specially designed instruction really focuses on what is the area that that student requires. However, it is very likely, and we've really been working hard with our ex-ed teachers, and I know some of you have attended our SDI series this summer. We've really worked hard trying to connect those dots and identify that when you have a student sitting in a collab math class, what is the specially designed instruction that they require and how can that be delivered? So we're going to go through an example later that really kind of spells out the bridge of how we're getting from point A to point C by using the bridge that we need to get students there. Point C being knowledge and mastery of core content. Point A being our tier 1 instruction that everybody is getting, and kind of making sure that we are aligning that with all of our students' needs through differentiation, and then providing the additional bridge support of the specially designed instruction for our students with disabilities. This is an expectation that is outlined especially in our collaborative classrooms, but there may be students sitting in gen ed classes or some self-contained classes that the teachers would really need to spell out what is the specially designed instruction for them as well.
And I should jump in here really quickly too, just to mention that we didn't do introductions of ourselves. So yeah, I'm Skip Tyler. I'm the high school math specialist. And let me go off of sharing the screen for a second so people can see who's who. All right, there we go. So again, Skip Tyler. Hey, everybody.
And I'll go. I'm Courtney Valenti. I'm one of the ex-ed specialists. My team supports Secondary East, but surely we support Division 1 as well.
Whitney Hollis, Exceptional Education Coordinator for Secondary East.
And I am Michelle Gilio. I'm the middle school math specialist.
All right, there we go. Thank you on that. So let's now return to our regularly scheduled program.
And I saw Tara Balla log in as well. She's one of our other coordinators, ex-ed coordinators.
Tara, do you want to introduce yourself as well? If she's there.
Sorry, I am here. I am the exceptional ed coordinator for middle schools and high schools in the West End, and you caught me multitasking. Sorry.
You got called out. All right, very good. Thank you for being here.
All right, Whitney.
All right, so what makes SDI special? So this triangle will probably look familiar to a lot of you guys because it's very similar to the RTI triangle. So similar to that one, looking at the bottom, that's our universal design for learning. So that's where most of our kids are going to fall. That's traditionally where our whole group instruction is taking place. And that's where we're basically teaching to the majority of our kids. And then as you move up, this is where we hit differentiated instruction. And like Courtney mentioned earlier, a lot of times differentiated instruction and SDI they get twisted. People are thinking that they're the same thing, but they're actually not. So differentiated instruction is also, taking place in our general ed classrooms and is, basically teachers are using that to adapt the instruction to meet student differences. And that's, using flexible grouping and scaffolding things, but that also is, being applied to the majority of our students. And then SDI is at the very top of our triangle. And that's where we're hitting our students who require specially designed instruction. That's basically necessary to meet the child's unique needs that were identified throughout the eligibility process. And that's where we're going to adapt through either the content, methodology, or just the instruction to address those needs for the student as they relate to whatever their identified disability is. So here on this slide is kind of just a chart. It kind of breaks down what SDI is and what it's not, just to give you guys a better idea. So SDI is in addition to the core Tier 1 teaching. And I think Ms. Badea mentioned this in the chat. It's a service or a support. It's what an educator or school personnel does through instructional practices, and it's teaching of specific skills that student requires. Promotes independence and presumed competence. So SDI is not a replacement for core instruction. It's not a placement. It's not what the student does. And it's not driven by what's available as far as scheduling and programming. We are not lowering expectations, and we're not presumed incompetence.
And I want to add in too that if you're not familiar with what Tier 1 instruction is, it is the instruction that goes to all students. So we have, everybody gets it in the classroom. So if it's something that's delivered to all, that's referred to as Tier 1. Tier 2 and Tier 3 are the more intensive type of supports.
Thank you, Skip. I think oftentimes we assume that knowledge, but that was great. So this is a way that we have kind of coached our teachers to think about this. And if you have attended our sessions in the past, you've seen this, but we really like using this blood pressure example. So you have multiple people throughout their lives, could potentially have concerns with blood pressure, and they could all be for different reasons. Some could be medical, some could be diet, some could be stress, anxiety, whatever it is. But when you go to a doctor for blood pressure, they do assessments. They do tests to kind of see what's going on. They ask you questions. They're going to enhance some prior knowledge to kind of assess where you are. They're also going to set a goal. So we have goals outlined in our IEPs for students. What are the skills that we want our students to reach? And in this example, what is the safe zone for blood pressure that a patient would, or a doctor would want a patient to be in? So there's many ways that we could get to that blood pressure that the doctor identifies as being our safe zone. It could be a change in our diet, which they could recommend, and we would try that for a while. And while we're trying that, we're going to make sure we're documenting and we're kind of keeping a track of, is it working? We're going to continue to test our blood pressure at home so that we can report back to the doctor. It may or may not work. And then for another patient, it may be that they require some sort of medication for their blood pressure. And so again, they would put that in place and you would continue to collect data and assess and see if it's working or not. All end up at the same point of trying to identify and get us to this safe zone. But if you don't have an issue with blood pressure, then you don't need any of those interventions, or you don't need any of those specialized treatments for your blood, because you're already there. So that's kind of the difference, and that's a visual we really like to draw, is that some students may already be there and they may understand what the content is that we're trying to reach them, and they may not need any other levels of service. But for students identified with disabilities, we have identified something that impacts that student from accessing general curriculum. Again, it could be because of behavior or academics. And just like the blood pressure example, it could have been something that was medically, within their body. It could have been diet. It could have been stress induced, whatever reason. But we identify these strategies that we are going to use to connect where we want to be, which is that safe zone, and where we're starting, because we're all starting in the same place of where you are with 0 interventions. So that's your tier 1, as Skip said, that's your whole group instruction that everybody's getting. So we really want to make that connection of kind of where we are and where we're going and what SDI really is for that student. Not everyone's going to need a blood pressure intervention. And then those that do, they may need different styles of intervention or different strategies in order to reach the same place. And if those strategies prove to be effective, we continue. If they don't prove to be effective, we come back, we re-meet, we reassess, and we put a new strategy in place. So we're never not providing something, because we still need to reach that safe zone and we still need to reach that level of mastery for students. So I hope that kind of gives you a connection of really what we're talking about for especially design instruction and students and their, academic skills and where they are, or other skills that they may require that specialized strategy or intervention on.
So now that we have a little bit of background for those people who were in the dark about what SDI is, now we're going to do a little sort. So Skip is going to put you into groups, and I just dropped in the chat a document that everybody needs to open up. And once you open that document up, you're going to click on the link for your room. So Skip's going to put you in room. So you'll see that room 1 is going to use the link at the very top. Room 2 is going to use their link. And you're going to work together to sort the cards. And when we get back together, be ready to discuss anything that you guys thought was challenging, you were uncertain about, or any other comments that you might have mentioned in your group. And then also be ready to talk about strategies you think fit in multiple categories. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come off mute or in the chat. And I think Skip is working on the groups now.
They're just about ready, so make sure you select a spokesperson.
Oh, that's right. Forgot about that.
So any questions before we get rocking and rolling?
You'll have about 8 minutes to do the sort. So make sure you're keeping track of time. And there's a place in the document that you can keep track of notes if you'd like.
So we'll plan on coming back at about 1:33, 1:34 in that range, and we will put or send a message out when you have about a minute or 2 left, but you may want to have someone else in your group be the timekeeper. So rooms are opening now, and introduce yourself to your partners in your new group too.
Design and use it in the general ed class.
Hey, we pulled you out, Darnell. Sorry, you're in the middle of a sentence.
Where'd we go?
All right, looking at the time, it probably wasn't enough time, but we don't want to run over our 2 hours, so we thought we'd pull you back in. Which group wants to start off with any challenges you guys faced?
I think I can say that was interesting. That there's a lot of things that I feel like overlapped. I mean, that we had to literally sit down and dissect each part of it. And was that an accommodation or a modification? Like, so this is definitely my hats off to all my ex-ed teachers. Always have been, always will be. Whew.
So really trying to dig into what makes the difference between an accommodation, modification, and an SDI. Absolutely. All right, another group want to add on to that?
For us, it's almost, some of them, we almost needed pictures to kind of go with the words. We didn't even know what some of the words meant, and if it had like initials that represented something, we didn't know what it was.
Real talk.
That's right. We had to look up some of this stuff too. Don't feel bad, Shamia.
Yeah.
We weren't trained on it. Any other comments about challenges? All right, what about one characteristic that you thought could go in multiple places? Tell us one of those.
I'm not sure about this, but I'll share. I know that we use, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not as versed on this, but the picture communication symbols, I was expecting that we will probably use that with students who have some communicable issues, maybe students on the spectrum. And so I was kind of up in the air about the specialized instructional strategies, because it's kind of like, are we talking about initially, are we talking about, can we teach the student how to use the program first, or are we assisting that, but the students could use it as accommodation? So we kind of had to talk that one through with our group, and knowing that the specialized instructional strategies were just that, methods, and not the actual assisted technology. I guess that would be assisted technology. That would be actually also an accommodation.
Very, very good, Miss Mays.
Thank you. I got my A for today.
That doesn't mean you're done for today, though.
Oh, the work is never done. You know that.
Would you like to see and check
Well,
in
no,
with
no,
Andy?
before I
Okay.
want to do some debating here. So, because I'm looking at everybody's different charts, and one I see is the formula triangle representing relationships between concepts and mathematical operations. I see it in each one of the categories. Who wants to defend why they put it in the accommodations category?
Well, I would put it in the accommodations category because this may be something that is provided to support the student, but not necessarily specific to their learning disability.
Okay. Anybody want to agree or disagree with that? All right.
I think
Go
it
ahead.
doesn't change the content.
Okay, so that's why you're saying it doesn't belong in the modification?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
But if it doesn't change the content. But what I was asking as far as questions, the difference between the accommodations and the modifications is to the content. So the formula triangles, I mean, are we giving every student that? Is every student going to be getting those formula triangles as a part of the instruction? Or is it just that student in order for them to meet the goal of that particular learning intention? Is it just for that particular student for that particular instruction?
So what I'm hearing you say is that maybe the difference between an accommodation and especially, or an SDI, is how many students get it or who gets it when? Is that a fair assessment of what you said?
Yeah, but it didn't sound right now. But yes, now that you bounced it back off of me, it still didn't sound right. But we had it under modifications.
Okay. Any other comments about this one? All right, Skip, go ahead and show them the table. Or maybe make it a little bigger. All right, so just take a moment to look at that, and if you can toggle back and forth between how you had it sorted and this, and then we can have a little conversation, and then we'll move on.
And I think it's also important as you're looking at it right now and you see something that might be different, please ask. We have our ex-ed specialists here who can answer probably better than Michelle and I can, but that's what we want you to see. It's a lot of information. You'll have this presentation sent to you here in just a second too. But let us know if you have questions about any of the language or why it's in a certain column.
I feel that because on the IEP, we write it at the accommodation list and we put sort of them all together, just seeing them differently now in 3 columns makes you think more about how to choose them the intention of why the student needs them or not. And sometimes we think that is for everybody and everybody else is having them. So that way it gets a little bit confusing, at least from my end. Just the way you presented it made me it hurts my brain, that we'll say.
Anybody else feel that way?
Good way, right?
I see a thumbs up. Somebody agreed with you. So go ahead.
I
go ahead.
keep talking to you. Where the top middle where it says decrease expectations, I feel like that doesn't sit right. Is there a reason? I feel like we're not supposed to decrease expectations. Like, I don't know. That seems weird to me. Is there a reason it's worded like that?
Can I clarify this point, Michelle and Skip?
Yes, absolutely.
So very good question. And Mr. West asked this question in our group earlier. So modifications, although some of these I don't completely agree with because I think they could be accommodations, but decreasing expectations, I want you to look in the parentheses where you say for students with alternate assessments only. So when you have students sitting in your grade level math 6th, 7th, or 8th grade classroom, and whether they are a gen ed or an ex ed student in there, the expectation for them is grade level standards. So if you modify the grade level standards, that's a modification. Students who require a modification to content typically are students who are eligible for an alternate assessment. So it is not going to be common. And I can't even think of an example off the top of my head. I'm sure there are of students who are sitting in a core content grade level class that require a modification to the content. They may require accommodations, but the expectation is the same because they take the same assessment at the end of the year. Does that kind of help clarify that a little bit?
Courtney, would a VGLA binder be in that category or no?
So a VGLA binder, which we don't do anymore.
Thank God.
For ESL still, did we?
Yeah. No, so we don't do VGLA, but like for student, that would have been a modification, yes, because the students required, VGLA was still an alternative assessment. So you could have adapted that content a little bit. But our students that take VAP, so they don't work towards SOLs, they work towards now what's called VSOLs, or what was previously called ASOLs. So they were not taught, the expectation for them was never grade level course content. Does that kind of help make sense? Like modifications are very few and far between.
Yeah, thank you.
And a lot of times we throw that word in there and we shouldn't, it should be an accommodation.
Correct, because like I was texting Whitney right now, I'm like a word bank could absolutely be an appropriate accommodation for a student. Right. And at the same time, pre-teaching vocabulary, it's an instructional strategy, could be specially designed instruction. So it's all about how you approach it and use it and the intent behind it.
And I think, Dina, you were trying to allude to that, and I don't know that I captured your words very well, but you were saying that if it's individualized, it's SDI. If it's an accommodation, it could be a group of people.
Right. That's kind of what I was saying as well. Yes.
And she's exactly right. What starts out as an instructional strategy, so to Ms. Mace's point with the picture chart, we're going to have to teach the student how to create or use that chart in the beginning. So that instruction is specially designed instruction. But once they master that, they are now going to use it as an accommodation to access the material that is being presented to them. So that's kind of how those things fold. So what she said was spot on earlier.
Right.
Great
And
example.
Well, would you put that in both areas then? Would you start out with that being specialized and but also put it in as a mod? Or later
Absolutely.
once
And I
it's
think, yeah. And I think that's where you guys have brought up some really good conversation about what is the intent behind the use of whatever it is, because a graphic organizer is an accommodation as well. But if you don't teach the kids, so if they're using something that's different because they need a sequencing model or they need something that's more definitive for them that other students aren't getting, you're going to have to teach them how to use it first. So that instruction is specially designed instruction. Remember the bridge, the blood pressure. And then once they generalize that skill, now it becomes an accommodation for them.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure. I hope that helps.
It did.
Yep.
it helps me too.
We do have another clarification in the chat from Rebecca. She was asking, are the items in the specialized instructional strategies column different methods that a teacher can use to deliver the instruction? And those in the accommodations column are specific to students 504 or IEP.
Yes. So the instructional methods like specialized writing techniques, specialized math techniques, those are different techniques that we are using for that student related to their area of disability. Whereas, and remember, we don't forget the I, instruction. So if it's just an accommodation, small group, extra time, read aloud, closed notes, copies of books, those are things that we are doing or giving the student. So we are going to give the student a copy of closed notes, but there's no instructional task behind that. That's an accommodation. The instructional task or the instructional strategy where we are teaching something, for example, the mnemonic device. You know, Skip and Michelle and I had a great conversation about using PEMDAS the other day and where that might be appropriate for a small specific group of students. That's your instructional strategy. Does that help?
She said yes.
You're good.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry, my internet is not working super well, so not sure
It
if
is
audio
okay.
is
I
going
just
through
want to
well
make
for me
sure
or
I
not.
clarified it.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions on this?
And I knew we threw a lot at you really quickly and said, read this and understand what it is. So take a chance later on after the session is over, come back and look over it. And if you have questions, reach out to us and let us know, because some of these, as Courtney was alluding to, you can argue multiple columns depending, again, on how it's being implemented. All right.
Okay, so an example of what this could look like in your math classroom. So you have students in your classrooms that you have gen ed students, obviously, and you have ex ed students who all run the gamut of identifications and all have very particular or specific set of needs. So it really is going to depend on what the needs are of that particular student in your class. Specially designed instruction that takes place in the math class would be in support of whatever the direct instruction is from the special education teacher. But remember, it may not always just be math. It could be, so if you look at this example talks about a student who has direct instruction with the speech pathologist. And so what is your responsibility in the math class to provide specially designed instruction that is related to speech? Well, you're obviously not going to teach the student language skills because that's what their speech path does. However, it could be that during math task and share activities, it could look like the student and other students who may have similar language needs or social skills needs, they could be pulled into a small group during the warm-up with some more explicit instruction or deeper explanation with the math teacher. And it could just be simple as reviewing what their roles and responsibilities are, or creating a task sheet for themselves, like how are they going to organize themselves if they have executive functioning needs. There also may be exceptional education students in your math class that don't require specially designed instruction there. So for example, if you have a student that has a reading deficit and their math skills are average or above average, then it may be that that student's going to need some support with understanding the words in a word problem. but they're not going to necessarily need specially designed instruction on the math, computation, and skill, if that makes sense. Okay, so we just wanted to kind of let you know what this could look like. Specially designed instruction does not have to happen every day. It does not have to happen every class, but it does have to be purposeful and intentional for the student. It could be they do a different warm-up assignment from the others in a small group setting with the teacher. That could be what they need for that particular day, lesson, content, whatever it may be. So really working with your the co-teaching pairs or working with case managers to identify what does this look like in the math room. When the student is with me, what are my expectations and what does this student require? And we've really pushed case managers to start that process early as soon as everyone returns so that we can have a more intentional conversation about student needs in the room. But this is kind of an example of what SDI may look like for a student in the math classroom and how you could support that from the teacher lens.
All right, this slide just kind of lists some strategies depending on what the specially designed instruction domain is. This list right here is not exhaustive or limited, and there's actually some more SDI domains that aren't listed on here. But these are just some strategies depending on what, where the student's deficit lies or what their specially designed instruction, what specially designed instruction they require. Some of these, at least on this slide, I want to point out behavior. That one is going to be, that one's going to require evidence-based program. So you'll see students who require SDI in behavior, maybe linked to a BLIS program, and that CRT would be the one to provide that direct instruction on behavior, but it could be supported in the classroom just to help with generalizing that skill later on. But once again, these are just some strategies based on these domains that are listed here. This is definitely not all of them. There are definitely plenty more though.
As we get to this part, bringing in that literacy connection that we talked about, we're really trying to use these strategies to scaffold in the literacy document to provide supports for our students who have difficulty with reading or language. So looking at what's over there on the right-hand side, when you get this presentation, and maybe now is a good time too, Michelle, just drop the presentation in the chat, is to, you can click on that image and it'll pull up our literacy page. Well, actually not ours, it's pull up literacy's page on all their different components and all their different content areas and the supports that are being put in place beyond mathematics, if it ever does decide to load. So this is sort of the same document, loan up view, wait for it. There we go. So you'll see that, in life literacy, it's the ability to do all of our 6 C's, basically, the problem solving, communication, connections, representations, reasoning, and what we can do in a math classroom to support that, and how the strategies that we've talked about so far today can be used to help with those connections and representations and reasoning. So in looking at this, encourage your students to build their vocabulary. Don't always, if you use little shorthand phrases, make sure you're backing it up with the mathematical vocabulary and requiring students to do it well. Encourage them to use pictures and different strategies and connect those. And you may be the one that needs to connect it, but hopefully students have done it differently, that you can say, here's what you did your way, here's what someone else has done their way, and by the magic of math, we can make those related to each other. So we are going to have another opportunity. This is going to be a little bit of a longer breakout for everybody. In this one, we're going to look at the slides that Michelle dropped in. And if you are, let me go to, I'll go to it in a minute. We're going to be looking at slides 20 through 29. You'll have about 3 minutes to look at it individually. And then in your groups, you need to have a role for a speaker, a person who's going to be taking notes, and the notes will go in the notes section of this presentation. And then also a timekeeper in your group, because we are going to try to limit it to 10 minutes. So in your room, come up with math examples that you can think of. Just brainstorm it, and if it's specific to your content area, that's fine. but we want you to think about how you might use this in your classroom as an SDI. And again, your note taker, put those notes in the notes section of the presentation. And then if you finished with your 2 slides, which are going to be assigned per group, is go take a look at other slides. And if you see something there that you wanted to add to, that's fine. But we want to make sure that you are ready when we come back to discuss your individual slides. And when we come back and report out, we're going to limit each slide to a maximum of 2 minutes. Just again, for time's sake, so we can get through all of these. So in that other link, Michelle sent you this one where you link to it. Down below, it's the same information there if you need to revisit the rules once you get over into your breakout rooms. And does everyone have a copy of the slides you can pull up? Are you okay with that before we open up the rooms? All right, and Robin, I did move your room just to balance things out a little bit. So you'll see some different people in a different group. So I'm starting the rooms.
Hi, everybody.
All right, looks like the majority of rooms are all closing. Give us a little feedback on just that activity that you went in to do. Was it a right amount of time or too much time, or are we throwing too much at you? All right, so thumbs up. I asked 3 questions, so thumb up doesn't help me.
Time-wise, it was good. I think some of us might have zoned out on what was the expectation in the beginning because the slide went away and we weren't really sure where to look for what was expected. Gotcha.
All right, thank you. Because we're doing this presentation again next week, so that'll help us update it and revise it. So I appreciate it. All right, so we are going to jump in then to the first slide of number 20 on mnemonics. And so we're just going to open it up. So we had group 1. You had these 2 slides. So you can sort of talk us through slide 20 first, and then we'll let anyone else chime in as well of thoughts.
I mean, we just basically took things that we knew we utilized in our own classrooms, mnemonic wise, in order to help, students. And we just kind of brainstormed different acronyms and different things that we, like I said, we use, listed them right there in the notes section. I mean, I'm sure there's hundreds more that we just didn't brush on, but I mean, it was a good start. Trying to get kids involved with, and I can speak only of the 2 that I know in particularly when teaching interest in the 8th grade, to remember the formula. I tell them I like to party, and we kind of get it going that way, and they remember that it's I-P-R-N-T. And then the bottom one, Dix Roy, we talk about these 2 people, domain and range, and X and Y, and so they.
So thank you for sharing that, Jennifer. Question I have for the group is, this is something Courtney alluded to earlier. Michelle and I have had conversations about it. How many of you use PEMDAS and FOIL and any of those, really, the iParty? I know I did. Let me just put it that way. And so our question is, this is listed as an SDI. So what, and I see Jessica say use GEM. So yeah, thank you. So, is this SDI? Is it, instruction? Let me get your thoughts on that.
I guess at first it could be SDI because it's a instructional strategy that you're using. But then once it's taught, it would then potentially go to an accommodation for a student or a modification for a student.
And Brian put in the chat that the question came up that if it is a good SDI strategy for XS students, and then decide it would be helpful for all students and deliver that strategy and method to the entire class, is it still considered an SDI? I think that's sort of getting to the same point.
So excellent question.
Great question.
And the answer is No.
No.
SDI is only for ex-ed students. So if it is something that is a benefit for the good of the group, then that we call just a good teaching practice and a good instructional skill for all students. But if it is something that is specific to a student need, then that's specially designed instruction. So that is a great question.
I think one thing that that we're trying to get out from the math lens is, I see a lot of people introducing order of operations with PEMDAS as the very first piece of math information. We don't want to start off with these mnemonic devices as our tier one. I'd rather have you say, here's a problem. I want you to work it out. Just 8 + 3 × 5. And you're going to get 2 different answers in your classroom. And so then you have that conversation of, hey, why are there 2 different answers? Why did this versus that? So order does matter. Oh, that's neat to know. There is a thing about the order. It's parentheses come before exponents. And we have that conversation, and then we can slip in PEMDAS, GEMDAS, whatever it might be, after we've already taught the math concept. The same thing with FOIL. FOIL only works when you're multiplying 2 binomials. We're really saying get rid of FOIL and talk about multiplying using the area method. And so that's a whole nother math training and session. So when we're looking at this as SDI, I would say try to encourage you to, if you're using this in your tier 1 instruction, that's okay, but try to scaffold it so that is not how you lead your instruction. And I know we said y'all were going to talk about it. I just talked about the whole diagram.
And just like Courtney said, if you're doing it for the whole class, it's no longer SDI. If it's just targeted to one or a group of students who need it for their IEP or for their need, then it's SDI.
Absolutely. So I think that's a good piece of like, where is it appropriate and where not. It's absolutely appropriate in an SDI lesson for a particular group of students that meets their need. It may not be the appropriate for teaching your whole group or your tier 1 or for everyone. So, but it definitely could be beneficial to those students that definitely have like a sequencing deficit or short-term memory deficit that really need those steps outlined. That could be good. Great questions.
All right, let's jump to the next slide about graphic organizers. Group 1, what'd you talk about with this?
I can talk some about this one. So we kind of thought through originally about specific topics that we've used graphic organizers for. Like someone mentioned different ways of classifying quadrilaterals. So you could use like a nesting model similar to what the graphic is given there for classifying numbers, or like a flow chart of sorts. But then we just started spinning off thinking about general stuff, because there's a lot of graphic organizers that you can use in a math class that also work in other classes too. So we also did talk about how anchor charts oftentimes have graphic organizers included on them, or maybe the whole thing is some type of graphic organizer. And then the last one I kind of had added at the last moment after we finished our group, but something that I've enjoyed doing with my students at the beginning of the year is creating like a kind of like a cheat sheet for translating. So I'll give my kids like a graphic organizer that has, plus, minus, multiply, divide, equals, and then they'll sort words into the categories to kind of think about which words mean add, which words mean subtract, things like that. And so that's just like, it's kind of vocab related to the next slide. But yeah, so those were the ideas we came up with.
Thank you. And Dina, you have your hand raised?
Yes. So I was in a training this summer, and it was shared with us that not to use those numbers that we are claiming, those symbols that we're claiming the words and the symbols match one another, simply because you could also translate those into other things or use other words to mean those things. It just depends on how the question is being asked. And so in the training that I went to, they've asked us to move away from the translating math language into symbols, and instead talk about the wordings and how that particular phrase was put together instead. So I think that's the move that we're moving to, is kind of moving away from those things. Anybody else heard that?
I know I've heard it with discussions of, like all together, everyone assumes it's plus, but it may be, I had 7 marbles and you took 5. How many do I have all together now? I have 2. I don't have 12. So it's, yeah, so we have to be really careful, especially if you're using cubes, I guess, where you circle things and you underline and you bold. That is a good individual strategy, I guess, but not something that is really something we're promoting on a larger scale for that reason, Dana. So thank you for sharing.
And I think what Rebecca was talking about was actually doing the translating part of algebra when you're going from symbolic to words and words to symbolic. I think it's okay to do organizers because you are going to need to know if the word of is in there, it means multiply and different things like that. So I think for word problems and tasks and things like that, where there could be a lot of different things, I think we stay away from the keywords. But when we're translating in algebraic and vice versa, I think it's okay to come up with ways to represent the different operations in that.
Any other questions on or comments on graphic organizers?
I also like the FRAIR model too. I think it's in the notes there, but that FRAIR model I think helps also to support the literacy piece as well. So what is it not, what it is, definition, can you draw a picture, those types of things.
Thank you for sharing. All right, group 2, you had the next 2 slides. So what did you talk about here? I know we really can't give examples other than, hey, Skip, just go look at our curriculum framework documents. It's all there. What did you talk about?
We talked about how we could use the FRAIR model to discuss vocabulary and to have the different examples like the word wall posters, and then use anchor charts.
Good, thank you. Is everyone familiar with the Henrico County, our math curriculum framework documents? Because this was a screenshot from, I think, the 8th grade topics. It might have been Algebra 1. Oh, no, it's 8th grade. And so within all of our documents, we have a section on vocabulary where we've tried to list some of the key words that are important for students. And if the word is bold, then there is a VDOE word wall card already associated for that. And I think it was, Michelle, 3 years ago, we printed out and gave cardstock copies of sets of word wall cards to schools. So there should be 3 per grade level floating around. So, check. We love seeing these hanging up in the classrooms. You can make a bulletin board where you put them in page protectors and you slide them in and out. You can laminate them and put them up, around. What we ask though is if it is a vocabulary word for the current unit, you put it somewhere that is visible for students. Don't just put all of them up at the beginning of the year and then it's just there. It's not meant to be decoration.
Right, and also think about how you can, if they're in that plastic sleeve, how can you help students see the importance of each piece? If you'll notice on the screen, there's definitely different representations and different colors to highlight the important pieces, and those are all good strategies for our students with disabilities as well.
And even having students recreate their own word wall cards after seeing this so that they have their own meaning associated to it. All right, what about numberless word problems? Again,
this one we talked about like number sense routines, where they don't always necessarily have numbers. It may be like a graph of some sort that we're going to eventually build off with our lesson that day, but just trying to get an understanding of, do they understand a graph or a particular diagram or something like that.
So what's the first thing students do when they see a word problem? This is all students, you should say.
They look at the numbers.
They give up. Oh, sorry.
They give up, they look at the numbers, or they do just what y'all did, is they don't say a daggone word, and they just stare at it like, I'm gonna wait and raise my hand and have you come over and help me out.
Yeah,
So,
my oldest partner said run, so.
and in many cases, they just take the two numbers and they start looking for a keyword and doing something with it. And so that's the instructional strategy. Again, this is something that is good for all students, but you can also scaffold it down as SDI, of making sure students understand the context of the problem before you even introduce numbers, so they pay attention to the math instead of looking at it as a problem that they have to get right or wrong. So in this example here, what questions do you have? Let's just do it as an example. What do you think the question would be that I'm getting ready to ask you if I gave this to you? Mr. Kelly drives the same number of miles a day. He drives some miles to work. After work, he drives a few more miles to the gym. And then afterwards, he grabs a healthy dinner on his way home. So what could I ask you about this?
How many total miles?
Okay.
How many miles are there from the gym to home?
All right.
How many between from home to work or from work to home? Really, just any, location.
Mm-hmm. And students may say, well, where did you stop to go eat? And that's okay, because they're reading the problem. That's what we're trying to encourage. And I see, some of the comments, Dina had starting, ending point. Sarah, you said you love the shepherd scenario. Are you familiar, everyone here familiar with the shepherd scenario? Sarah, do you want to talk about that?
Share, please.
We actually did it in a previous workshop. They did a research on some students about why they are having problems with the word problems. And one of the things that he did was he gave them this question about a shepherd having 20 sheep and 5 sheepdogs. How old was the shepherd? And all the kids tried to make a math problem out of that when there isn't one. And my kids always try to make a math problem out of it.
And I'd encourage you to do that with your students too. Something as simple as that, because it really does tell you a lot about the student reading comprehension as we're talking about literacy. So if you want some more support on numberless word problems, let us know, and we're happy to help you create those or design those for individual students. All right, group 3, we had 24 and 25.
So the first slide talks about pre-teaching vocabulary, and this can be used constantly throughout the year. There are a couple examples that were given. The Frere model is more of a visual thing where you pull from each student's prior knowledge to determine what the definition is that works for them. Non-examples, they can draw a picture and things like that. And then the Anita Archer one is more of a verbal strategy that goes with the definitions and examples. But the biggest piece is that you're using students' prior knowledge to help them better understand the vocabulary terms that they're going to see throughout, whether it's the lesson or the entire unit.
Awesome, thank you. Can anyone add on to that? Everyone's saying Hunter summed it up perfectly. All right, our XS partners, do you have anything you want to add on? Okay, very good. Let's go to peer-assisted learning.
So this one was really cool. I would suggest taking some time to see this video. I had never seen this strategy used. It kind of has a couple different names, but what they talked about was Go Mo, and it's taking any type of topic, and it can be across any class, and you give the students like any amount of time to write down one piece of information that they remember about the topic, and then they pass it to another student. And so it kind of rotates around the room so that everyone is being able to show what they know, but then they go and kind of interview each student so that they are hearing what the other student knows about it and they can discuss it together. And in this video clip, this teacher used it as a review activity because they had a test coming up. So then students had all this information from each other by the end of class to take home with them and study for their test. So it just allows each of the kids to work together, which they pointed out that it's very equitable because each student has a chance to show what they know and learn from one another.
All right, thank you. And as was mentioned, there were videos there on these slides. You had the presentation. We'll also send it out by email. So take a look at them too. They're somewhat short movies. All right, let's move to the next group, 26 and 27. And we have chunking. Also, before we get to that, thank you, Tally, for putting in the How Old is the Shepherd word problem link. So if you're interested in seeing that video, it's there. Go ahead and make a note of that and copy paste it somewhere. All right, back to
So for chunking, we talked about one example that we thought of was chunking the steps for solving equations. So we referenced the CRA, and then we also said that different students might need different amounts of time to cover the individual chunks. We talked about how sometimes checklists or timelines could be helpful for when they have mastered different chunks of it. And then we also talked about like even how you could chunk up the solution, like why does the solution work? Could you prove it? Did you check it? Things like that.
Love it. Anyone else think of ideas or have used this?
I know you all see this a lot of times in IEPs. Chunking is a very common accommodation.
I think chunking for me worked really well last year with doing solving inequalities, because there's a lot going on with inequalities. There's the graphing, there's the closed and open circle, there's the symbols, what do they mean? And so breaking it down into like manageable pieces really helped with teaching inequalities.
And I think it's something that you can do in a small group with like-minded students. So you can give them a little task and set them on their way, and you can move over to somebody else, and then you can come back to them. So it's a good use of small group instruction as well.
And I feel like it's also a really good add-on to, or a precursor to, extended time, because a lot of people put extended time in there, but extended time for what and for how long? Chunking allows you to break those pieces into smaller parts, go into maybe a smidge more depth, get a little bit more questions asked for the kids to have some sort of a knowledge base. And then if they need some extra time to build on those, then they have it.
I would also add that in the chunking, it's a good idea to make connections to previous topics so they can understand where we at, how to make that connection, and how we are moving forward, and the importance of adjusting that and apply it to real life so they can make those connections so they can learn it faster.
And Skip, can I just say real quick, like this is one of those that is a great instructional strategy, like you all have all spoken about, but it's also an accommodation because chunking on the flip side could also be, instead of giving 10 problems at a time, we give them 3 problems at a time in different sets. So this is a great example of what we talked about earlier, how whatever the intent is behind it, it could either be SDI with an instructional strategy, or it could be an accommodation that the student requires. But you guys have come up with some really good stuff.
Yeah, and I love the conversation that y'all have had. Rebecca put in the chat too about breaking a lesson down into 10, 15-minute chunks. And it's the same thing there. And I want to loop back in math workshop of the focus lesson. We want it to be less than 15 minutes. It's okay to chunk your focus lesson. If, you know, a lot of our high school teachers have a hard time, you know, saying, I can't do it in 15 minutes. All right, well then chunk it. Granted, this is more not an SDI, but an instructional piece. When we're looking at our stations, I think this coming year, we're going to have a more important need for remediation stations, where we might have some things where kids come in and you give choice activities to them to say, hey, if you need work on, you know, taking Jenny's comment about solving inequalities, if you need to work on whether it's an open or closed dot, you use this activity. If you want to work on whether it's, you know, how to graph it, you do this activity, and giving students the autonomy to select what is important for them. And then that's also an opportunity for you to pull them into small guided math stations where you could work one-on-one, one-on-two with individual students and make that specifically an SDI activity. So love that y'all are all over that one. All right, I'm going longer than 2 minutes per slide here, so I'm going to try to pick it up a little bit since I'm not following my own directions. Formula triangles.
Kind of like what you guys referenced with the order of operations in PEMDAS is kind of what we talked about in our group with the formula triangles, is like to teach the vocabulary first, give them pictures and labels, show them where they are, what they mean, before you give them the triangle. Once you've given them the triangle, you can give them the foldable, but don't just give it to them. It's important to give them time to play with them. And then definitely make connections to other content, talk about how I guess chunking goes with this too, talk about what the operations mean and the properties, why the triangles work. Make sure you make connections to previous knowledge as well as connections to where you're going with this knowledge. That's all we have.
I really like how you said making them make sense of the organizer, not just giving them the organizer.
That's the key with all these. Yeah.
I thought that was the idea too, that we said that as far as we might have to teach them how to use it first, master it, so that they'll be able to use it and have a air of independence about working through certain problems that you want them to.
All right, let's go to CRA.
This was our group. We talked about using it for square roots, equations, you know, like, and honestly, we talked a lot about is this an SDI or is this something that, you know, we like to do in math anyways, because you want to teach them that concrete, representational, and then the abstract, right? You want them to have an understanding of why we're doing something like solving equations. You want to create some zero pairs, and you know, you like for them to see like what's happening. And especially in middle school, we talked a little bit about just the middle school brain. They understand concrete more than they understand abstract at that age. So we talked about, you know, where we use this. We use it all the time, pretty much every concept. We're modeling and representing and then going into the abstract. So.
And I think, again, it goes into that small group instruction once you've taught the lesson, and then if a student is not getting it, you bring it back in for these students, and it's just a refresher for them, but it's another strategy for them to continue to use. And if they don't get to the abstract by the end of the unit, it's okay. They have other strategies they can use to learn the material.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that a lot of the middle schools, the students enjoy the concrete piece. One thing that I've observed is that many of our accelerated and honors students don't know how to do concrete because they're so proficient with the procedure of things. And so that's, you know, they don't have a depth of understanding, they have a depth of, you know, completing steps and replicating what we do. So as much as we can include the manipulatives in the classroom and have it be available at any point in time, not the 3 days that I'm going to show you how to do it because we have an SOL question on it. You know, that's the wrong intent. So have these tools available in your classroom as much as possible and as much as social distancing and cleaning will let us this coming year. All right, what about this one, 29?
Hold on, Tylee had a question.
I'm sorry, Tylee.
So I just wanted to bring up that with concrete, it also allows your students to do better with hands-on. They're able to visually see it, they're able to touch it, especially if we have those blocks in front of them. They're able to do something maybe on a slightly simpler level, which is totally fine because that at least gives us a baseline of, okay, this is where we start with, and this is where I have to get you to, but at least we know where we're starting. So in a lot of our kids, especially those with special needs, they are more hands-on. It's something that they need to see and be able to grasp and touch in order to build those deeper connections.
Absolutely.
Sharon. All right, now this next one.
We definitely talked about like what you see in the image about the I can statements and using a checklist. And again, we talked about, you know, the middle school level and teaching them those like organization skills. But then we also talked about rubrics, like maybe using a rubric, whether it's for a math project or a task or just group work in general, like teaching them how to function in a group. But this one, we weren't 100% sure what executive functioning support was.
I'm right there with you, so don't worry. Courtney, why don't you jump in? You and Whitney.
And I'll tell Whitney and Tara to jump into. So executive functioning, you're really looking at those kind of daily life skills, time management, organization, ability to kind of sequence tasks that need to be done in order to complete, you know, where I'm starting to where I'm going, kind of basic things we take for granted. So that's kind of what we're looking at, you know, as far as you could be looking at a student with some significant ADHD with work completion. And so they would really need some support with, you know, managing their time as far as creating a priority list. Here's what I need to do first, and here's what I need to do second. And they could do that in order to be able to like get them through a task. So if there's multiple points in a project or something that they're doing, you know, teaching them and working with them of how to support and creating that for them and managing their time, you know, spend 10 minutes on this part, things like that. That's really beneficial. That's really where you're looking at for executive functioning.
And I'll jump in there and say some teachers have used playlists as a general instructional tool, but it could also be something modified where, to Courtney's point, here are the different activities we have, here's the time limits. The checklists that we're providing on the website are pretty general in terms of do you understand the topic, but it's really drilling down more of the daily life and what's happening in the class.
Yeah, and I just wanted to piggyback. It always makes me laugh because I don't think there's a single 9th grade boy alive with or without a disability who knows how to function without someone prompting them to what they need to do next. But that's how you think of executive functioning, right? We want to teach the skills that our students will eventually go out into life and know how to prioritize tasks, follow a system of, you know, what your classroom always kind of has the same system in the routine, but you're always you may have a couple of our students who just wait for you to prompt them to what's next. So hopefully they would have IEP goals to become more independent on fulfilling the routine without us kind of piggybacking and reminding them what each step along the way is. And I just wanted to talk about social stories and social narratives. I taught a deep run for many, many, many years, and I don't know if it was just us, but the incidence of autism is rising, and we use social skill, especially design instruction, a lot with our students with autism. I had young men who were in the specialty center who on paper had a much higher IQ than I do. But the minute they got a test that didn't have an A on it, I had students who ran out of the building. I had students who ran around screaming. So we had to build some social skills goals on how to handle things when you get an unexpected test grade. So that may be a strategy that you have to employ with students that, you know, falls outside of that academic range, and it might not be an everyday thing, but as you have those benchmark tests coming and those sorts of things, and or it was a big test time of year, the anxiety of our students would rise, and we would need to use that instructional strategy way more than we did during other periods of the year.
All right, thank you for adding on and clarifying that a little bit more for us, Tara. All right, so that's sort of.
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you do it. No.
Hey, Skip. I did want to say something about that. Like our group in 29, we were talking about how, like, you know, that the difference of when they need it, when everybody needs it, and when just certain people need it. And so it kind of came up again with closed notes. And we're like, you know, saying that, you know, a lot of teachers use closed notes all the time, you know, with everybody. So we talked about maybe even having the students, like that might be a place where some students really don't need a closed note. Maybe they can do more of a reflection and more of what do I need to remember and I need to know, while these students with SDI really need like the closed notes.
That's
so that was kind of one of the ways we kind of processed that one. But I mean, of course, that requires the teacher to kind of stretch and change, you know, to allow the kids to kind of like be more independent. But anyway.
So that's kind of the philosophy of just in time versus just in case. So just in case is when you give it to everybody. Just in time is more of the SDI here. This person needs this, and I'm going to give it to them then. Any other final thoughts on our different strategies? And by far, this is not every strategy out there. This is just a couple that, you know, we thought we could bring to you guys.
All right, bring down the home stretch. And how do we do all these things? You know, we mentioned math workshop already. What, you know, how you can put it into your Schoology course. You model what you're doing using manipulatives or skills, or just asking for students to express their thinking. And then even as, you know, Pam was just saying there too, you know, looking at the close activity, or trying to come up with different warm-ups and closure things. So it's all the hard work of it comes on the planning side of things. So that way, when you're in the classroom, it's really just facilitating, you know, the tools. So it's really important for you to get with your collaborative pairs and talk about this beforehand. You know, yes, the gen ed teacher is responsible for creating the lesson plans. We're going to talk real quickly about that. But, you know, the ex-ed should come in there and look for pieces in that plan of how I can personalize it for the students who need the accommodations. So we'll sort of jump to that. I sort of got ahead of myself. So, hey, take it away.
No, I think that was a perfect segue. That's exactly right. And what I was going to really focus on was that common planning, or that common time. Before school, planning time, after school, whatever it is, there has to be intention and purpose behind the lesson plan for the students. Because although the gen ed teacher is providing the content, the pacing, all of that, absolutely the exceptional education teacher has to own what is going to be the specially designed instruction for the students. But both teachers have got to know what's going to happen, when, for who, and how within the classroom in order for it to work seamlessly for the classroom environment and for the students. So on the screen, you'll see kind of an example of what does this look like in a lesson plan. There is a section in most lesson plans specifically for SDI. What we tend to see a lot, our teachers will often just list modifications. Oh, well, we're going to do small group read aloud and, you know, use some manipulatives. And that's great, but those are accommodations. What is the instructional strategy, like we've taught today, through the differences? Like, what does it look like and what is it going to be? And it may be a couple of different things for different students. So like this was an example that we have provided before, where it lists the standard at the top, which would be on the top of the lesson plan anyway, whatever it is that you're doing for that day. And you're also going to have to know what are the IEP goals and what are the needs of the students, the EE students that are in your class. Because what we are doing is we are providing instruction that's based on their disability. Therefore, it should be outlined in their goals. So what are their goals that they're working on? But we're going to connect that to the content that you're doing in the classroom so that it all works together for the student and the student is able to understand and make those connections that we need them to make. So in this particular example, the standard is inverse relationships using addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and eventually getting to multi-step equations. And I think almost every middle school student has a goal in their IEP about being able to solve multi-step equations. So this was an example that we found and came up with, tweaked a little bit. For the student who has an IEP goal around understanding inverse relationships, using manipulatives to create number sentences and then create the inverse with addition and subtraction, and then kind of building upon those skills. So this is not something that would be done whole group for everyone, but like Michelle and Skip have been kind of identifying all throughout this presentation, absolutely appropriate for a small group or a station as we're going through, but being purposeful and intentional with what we're doing with our stations. So if Courtney has a specific need and Michelle has the same specific need and so does Skip, pull us together on purpose in a station rotation together so that when you get to our group is the SDI. So it's not anything extra in addition. It's already a seamless process of what you're doing in your classroom. So just want to make sure that everyone kind of hears the same message that yes, it's going to be outlined and detailed differently in a lesson plan. It's got to be a combination of both teachers together, but the exit teacher is really responsible for kind of the driving force behind what is the specially designed instruction going to look like for those students. But both teachers have got to kind of be on the same page. Okay.
Thank you for that summary there.
All right. So we were going to do each one in isolation and do the waterfall. Have you heard about the waterfall in the chat before? Okay, so I've seen some heads saying no. So in the chat, you are going to type in the numbers you feel are SDI, but do not hit enter until I say go. All right, so you're going to type in the numbers of the ones you think are true SDI strategies. And do not hit enter until I tell you to go. All right, on the count of three. 1, 2, 3, go. Seeing a lot of threes, a couple fours. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, a couple ones in there.
All right, I think everybody has responded with it, who has responded with a 3. So anybody want to tell us why you think 3 is definitely 1?
You're doing it with a small group. It's not a whole class instruction. It's something that you're pulling specific students to in order to review for an upcoming concept, but it's not whole group.
Okay, do we all agree with her synopsis there? All right, now I saw a lot of 4s early on. Who wants to justify why 4 could be an SDI? Or somebody that wants to say why it's not an SDI. Either way.
I didn't think it was, only because usually reading something to somebody is, even though it is only 2 students, is usually an accommodation. to reading or audio. Courtney's like, yeah. It's usually an accommodation that we put for read aloud or audio.
If you want to play poker with Courtney, it's easy money there.
I have no poker face. Great explanation. Good job.
Right, yeah, exactly. So reading to somebody is not giving them a strategy that they can use later on. It's just reading to them. It's almost enabling them to a certain degree.
And
All
also
right,
pulling 2 students out doesn't make it SDI either. Again, it depends on what you're doing.
I didn't see, and I don't think anybody put 5. So somebody tell me why 5 is not, real quick. Come on, brave people.
That's just scaffolding.
Yeah, it's just differentiation, right? And then 6 is another one that was a big one. Who wants to talk about why that is?
Or isn't?
I thought
it was an accommodation.
Might have a reasonable problem. So it was specific to them.
So,
Okay,
so it's specific to them, so it's specific to one student. It's not SDI because it's not a strategy that you're using. It's an accommodation to assist them in completing a problem.
Very good.
That's the difference.
What if it said like teaching them how to use the graph paper?
Oh yeah, that's totally different. Yeah, teaching them to use it as a strategy, that would be SDI. But providing it for them after they know how to use it and are using it to then solve a problem, that's an accommodation.
Okay.
Hey, quick, y'all no longer need us.
Yeah, right. Don't leave me. I always get confused until I get into these things like an hour in, and then I'm like, oh, duh, that makes sense.
That was a great question, though. Great. That exactly. Perfect.
And the good thing is we're recording this. You can come back and watch all of our faces and our things and hear yourself over and over and over.
All right, so we're not going to touch 1 and 7 because those are pet peeves of Skip and I, or me and Skip. Any questions on these?
I like Slope Guy.
How do you use it? That's why it's the pet peeve.
So if you used it in, and I don't want to say a station because that would just be for everybody, but if you were to use it as a pullout for students, maybe as a precursor, almost like number 3, or if you're going into a little bit more detail with a student, then it might be considered SDI, but not as itself.
Yeah, I think students, I could use it with students individually because students do have a issue with directions and directional kind of things. And so horizontal, vertical can be reviewed as well with that. But yeah, individually, yes. But we did use that for a whole class. So, okay. I get what you're saying.
Well, and for Michelle and I, it's more of for people that use it, are you using it on the front end of the instruction or the back end of the instruction? And that is really my hang up with it of I could draw Mr. Slope Guy and just forget which eye he's winking and I'm wrong. And I have no idea why. And so then am I memorizing Mr. Slope Guy's face or am I learning what slope is, positive and negative? And so I think there's other ways of doing it. Similar with the butterfly method, it's great if you can explain why it works. But the majority of our teachers and majority of our students have no idea why it works. They just know that if I circle these 2 and that one's bigger than this one's, they're equivalent or they're not. And so are we using it as a trick, again, as a plug for the Next to Tricks?
Next to Tricks.
Have next week, again. So that's what we're trying to get away from is using it as tricks. I always, did keep, change for subtracting and negative, but I backed it up with the mathematics afterwards and made sure they understood why. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And if a student can come up with it on their own and they create it and they have the meaning behind it, then that's wonderful. But teaching that strategy with the butterfly method, there's so many ways you can go wrong. And then there's no meaning behind that 8 and that 9. They don't understand that you've gotten a common denominator and maybe it's not the smallest denominator that goes into both of them. So there's a lot of math that they're missing if you're just using that strategy.
And what happens if you made it 1 2/3 and 3/4?
Mm-hmm.
No, it no longer works. So it's trying to do something that works, and you understand how.
And we are
Anyway.
at 3 o'clock, Skip.
We start at 3 o'clock.
Oh, my bad. Be quiet. Bye.
No, somebody did follow his 2 minutes per slide mantra. So key points. There they are. I think you've highlighted the majority of them. Just SDI is tough. It's we do have a lot of conversations about what's SDI versus what's differentiation, and you've had good conversations about it. We're not going to beat that horse. So just look at the rest of them here. I think we've the third bullet is a great question you all asked in the middle. If we're doing a whole class, it's not SDI, and we want you to just know about all these resources available so that when you start having conversations with your cooperating teacher, that you can ping off each other, and then also share this information in your PLCs with your other teachers. And Courtney, was this one yours, or you want me to just bring it home?
Just bring it home. We can bring it home.
Good deal.
Yeah, this is just a visual. Just a visual. We already talked about it as far as planning instruction for students.
And the key point is planning with your like the two teachers planning together, at least some form of way.
So here's a Schoology course. Do you want to explain what's in that?
Yeah, so in our Schoology course, which you have, it's an XEd teacher Schoology course, but you can certainly join it. The access code's there for you, but we have folders full of different SDI resources in general, and then more specifically ones that are directly related to math. So if you want to look through those, like we've done lesson plans, we've done templates, everything for you there. Like if you wanted to kind of see what one looks like or pull one to use one, have at it. And we're always adding.
So questions will hang around afterwards to take any of those unless there's something dying that you need to know right now that's good for the whole. Anything there? Okay. So just revisiting, hopefully, let's look at our success criteria that you can now, people say, what are some resources you can use? You're able to identify them. And then you can also start thinking about the best ones to use to support your students in learning. So we hope that you see how this fits in with the bigger picture of our math workshop goals at the content level and the instructional design and literacy from the 3,000 foot, and then that tying into all of our county documentation. So again, we can't thank you enough for coming here in August during your times off here. We wish you to enjoy the rest of your summer, but if you want to come next week to any of our other PLs, come on, bring it on. Let's go. We're happy to see you. And otherwise, we will see you in a couple of weeks. So we'll hang out for any last minute questions. Y'all have a great day. And thank you for our XEd people for joining us.
Yes, absolutely.